Okay, so yeah, welcome to this session by Denny Vrandečić, who is the okay. So I'm getting some echo.
Yeah, welcome to this session by.
Okay, sorry. Okay, the YouTube was playing on my computer. Let's have another try. So welcome to the session by Denny Vrandečić. Denny is responsible for the very ambitious project of abstract Wikipedia to formalize the structure of Wikipedia articles, to make them in one abstract representation and then generate the text in various languages. And let's give the word to Denny, and he will talk about the project.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me, and for the very nice introduction, Inari. I'm very excited to be here. I've been reading about grammatical framework for a long time, and actually, grammatical framework has been one of the main inspirations of behind what we are doing here with Abstract Wikipedia. And so I'm very, very honored to be here and to present about the work that we're doing. Can you see the screen? I hope so.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes, we are.
Okay. Okay. So last year I joined the Wikimedia Foundation to work on a project called Abstract Wikipedia, which has the goal of making much more knowledge available in many more languages than it is today. So today I want to present Abstract Wikipedia, how it works by generating multilingual Wikipedia articles, following very much the ideas of grammatical framework. So why do we need that? I have the presentation scheduled for quite a while, for about 3 hours, if I remember the timing correctly. I'm very happy to have questions, discussions, and so on during the talk, because we have a very relaxed time slot. Otherwise, I will just go through the slides, and feel free to ask questions at any time. And yeah, let's see where it takes us. I would be very happy to have a lively discussion on what we're doing. So at Wikimedia, we had the organization that runs Wikipedia, Wikidata, Wiktionary, and other projects. Our goal is, our mission is to imagine a world where everyone can share in the sum of all knowledge. Given that Wikipedia is celebrating its 20th birthday this year, let's ask the question, where are we regarding these goals? Wikipedia today covers more than 300 languages and has more than 50 million articles in those languages. This sounds pretty good, but if you look a bit closer, you will see that it's very unevenly distributed. English has more than 6 million articles. It's pretty complete. I mean, every Simpsons episode has an article. But in Hausa, a language with more than 60 million native speakers and another 30 million second language speakers, which is huge, we only have about 10,000 articles. We don't serve it well. So there's a lot of knowledge which is not available in Hausa and in many of the other 300 languages that we support. But it's not just English, you know, having everything, and the other languages have much smaller. There's also a lot of knowledge not available in English. So our second most active community is German. And in German, we have 2.6 million articles. But the interesting thing is that the overlap between English and German is surprisingly small. Only about half of the articles which are in the German Wikipedia are actually also represented in the English Wikipedia. There's more than 1 million articles in the German Wikipedia alone which are not available to the English language speakers. And this is true for almost every of the languages. Even in Hausa, that we have seen with 10,000 articles, there are more than 500 articles, more than 5% of the Hausa article, which don't have representation in English. There are articles like this one in Hausa about female authors or filmmakers, actresses, makeup artists, singer-songwriters, entrepreneurs, and those are all well referenced articles with good sources and so on, which are not represented in the English or many other Wikipedias. In fact, 51 women from Hausa Wikipedia are missing from English versus 33 men. Again, we see here the usual Wikipedian inequity, which is not as pronounced in Hausa. About a third of the biographies in Hausa are about women, 2/3 are about men, roughly. But again, we see that actually more women don't make it to English Wikipedia than men don't, which is just surprising. Inequity goes really very deep in those things, unfortunately. Of the 20 million topics that have Wikipedia articles, only about a third of those is covered by English Wikipedia, never mind the other languages. So there's a lot of knowledge which is out there, but not available to a single reader, because I mean, an individual reader that's only read like a few languages, maybe 2, 3, 4, or whatever. They feel comfortable with, and otherwise, the knowledge in the other 300 Wikipedias is basically hidden from them. But even just looking at the Wikipedia articles, it's not just the number of articles, gives you a very incomplete picture. This is the English article about Madikiri. It's a whole essay. It goes on for several thousand words. But if we go to Amharic, another African language, it's just a sentence. And Amharic, again, has several tens of millions of speakers. In Hausa, we don't even have an article. And so we have also incompleteness on below the level of articles, and there's much knowledge not available for many speakers. And one of the reasons is that the community sizes are just very different. There are about 70,000 active Wikipedians. Active in this case is defined as doing more than 5 edits per month. So of those 70,000 Wikipedians, the largest group by far is the English Wikipedia, with more than 30,000 Wikipedians. Our second most active wiki, German, goes down already to 5,500. Only 11 languages, including English and German, have more than 1,000 active contributors, and about half of our languages have 10 or fewer active contributors. Writing and maintaining a current, comprehensive, and correct encyclopedia with 10 people in their spare time, that's quite a challenge. So regarding our goal of a world where everyone can share in the sum of all knowledge, we're not doing that great, actually. And the fundamental issue is that the cost of Wikipedia is the number of topics that we want to cover times the number of languages, because all these articles in all those different Wikipedias are written independently. So we have to write every article in every language independently. We have to write an article about Madikiri in English, in Amharic, in Hausa, in Chinese, again in all those different languages. And that's a big cost. We have about 20 million topics, things that have articles across the Wikipedias. We have about 300 languages. That's a large number. What we want to do is turn this multiplication into an addition, making the languages and the topics independent of each other, so that you can create the content only once, but have it available in all the languages. That's our goal. How are we doing with that? So this is the Urdu article about Madikiri. What we already have here is, the stuff on the top and on the side. This comes from the software. This is already internationalized. The nice thing is the info box that we see on the side, the references, the site links linking to the different languages, the the authority control files at the bottom of the article, all of these are not actually maintained locally. They're not maintained on the Urdu Wikipedia itself. They are already maintained in the central store only once. So all of these information and so on, they all are maintained in Wikidata, which is a project which was started in 2012 about creating an open knowledge graph that everyone can edit. In Wikidata, we have pages for all the entries that have Wikipedia articles, like here for Madikiri. And these pages now, as you see them here, it looks like it is English, but we can actually just switch the language, like for example here to Hindi, and we have the same content as in the as we saw in the English, because the knowledge graph in Wikidata is the same for all of those. So whether you see it in English or in Hindi or in Hebrew or in Arabic, all of the contents are exactly the same. Because this is structured data, and you can edit it in any of those languages. And it will be immediately reflected in the other languages, because it's just a single knowledge graph, which is being displayed in the different languages. Because for every topic that we have this Q identifier, which says, okay, this is not Madikiri, and this is the Arabic label for Madikiri, but we're actually really referring to Q7186. So when we talk about anything else, like for example, it's a person, what have I seen he said in Arabic, the person here is also just a label. In reality, there's a Q number behind it, Q5, and if you click on it, you would see that on that page. So, and this is the German view. In fact, we support about more than 430 languages in Wikidata, in which you can see the knowledge graph, in which you can edit the knowledge graph. And it's always the same content. So here we have this, we are already following the rule of creating and maintaining content only once, but making it available in other languages. This is easy with structured data, because you really naturally have to just translate the labels, and you can get the different views. So if you scroll down on the page of Madikiri in Wikidata, at some point get to those identifiers. We have seen also as authority control files. And these help to connect Wikidata to external data sources. So for example, here we have the virtual international authority file, ISNI, yes, BenQ, NORAF. We have many other catalogs coming from national libraries, archives, museum, other memory institutions, and so on. And this can kind of turns Wikidata into a form of modern digital Rosetta Stone, with the difference that we don't offer only free languages, as the Rosetta Stone did, but we actually connect to more than 6,000 linked catalogs, where you can find more information about a topic, but also how is this topic represented in those different places? What is the identifier there, so you can connect it across many different machine-readable catalogs, and how it connects with the whole world. So we have those more than 6,000 catalogs that we link to. Wikidata describes today more than 90 million items, and has more than 1.3 billion statements describing those items, connecting them with each other, giving them values, and so on. So it's pretty big. There are more than 20,000 contributors each month. This is the number I'm most proud of about Wikidata. So we have a large active community working on this. And in total, so far, more than 400,000 logged-in users have contributed to Wikidata, which is a much bigger number than I ever expected for people editing knowledge graphs. And they have so far done more than 1.4 billion edits. In fact, Wikidata became last year the first wiki to have crossed more than 1 billion edits, and we're already at 1.4 billion now. The second wiki only to do that is the English Wikipedia that did it earlier this year, about half a year ago, just in time for its 20th anniversary. Wikidata, being a knowledge graph, allows to query that knowledge graph. We translate everything in Wikidata to RDF, which means it's about 12 to 13 billion triples, which are put into a large triple store, and then you can run Sparkle queries over that. Sparkle is a standard language to query knowledge graphs, and To my big surprise, we see more than 16 million Sparkle queries every single day going to the endpoint, which means the knowledge in Wikidata is also widely used in many, many different places. The Sparkle endpoint is pretty amazing, actually. It's at query.wikidata.org, and it allows you not just to query it, but also to visualize the queries in many, many different ways. So you can, for example, without writing a single line of code, all you have to do is writing a Sparkle query. You can here ask for examples for the alumni of Chalmers University and their pictures in Wikimedia Commons, and then put them into a scrollable and zoomable visualization. So we all put this information together and display it in a single result. Or even more interesting, we can ask for Vermeer paintings by the location. So we have a lot of Vermeer paintings. We know in which museum or collection they are. We know where this collection is located. So we can actually ask the query, give me all the paintings by Vermeer, look them up on Wikimedia Commons, where we have pictures of those paintings, look up the geocoordinate of the museums or collections where they are, and put them on a map rendered by OpenStreetMaps. And then you can click on this map and see which pictures are where. So we get this highly interactive thing just by doing a single query and visualizing the result within the query directly in the Sparkle endpoint. And you can take those results, embed them in your websites anywhere on the web, and be based on Wikidata data. I think this is actually pretty cool. Another example that you can do is to take a look at Madikiri's academic genealogy. So we have the information: who is the doctoral supervisor of Marie Curie, who is the doctoral supervisor of Gabriel Lippmann. We get to Helmholtz. We go all the way back, to Otto Menke, to Wichmenhausen, and so on. So Lichtenberg. So we can see the academic genealogy of people like Marie Curie and many others who supervise them. And it's all visualized as a graph. Again, not a single line of coding. We get the pictures from Commons. We put them in. We render this as a graph that is actually zoomable and interactable and so on, directly from Wikidata. And this information, Marie Curie's supervisors, Gabriel Lippmann, is this little statement here in Wikidata. We say the doctoral advisor is Gabriel Lippmann, and this same information is also being displayed in the Urdu Wikipedia here in the info box on the side, but also, for example, in the Welsh Wikipedia, where we have this information, in the Romanian Wikipedia, in the Slovenian, Belarusian, Greek, Czech, Azeri. A growing number of Wikipedias rely on Wikidata for the info boxes, for the information. And this is exactly how we get to this kind of decreasing the cost, of making it dependent for the languages, where we maintain the supervisor of Marie Curie in one place and we make it available to all of the languages without further cost then, and make it available to everyone. This is exactly where we want to go. So all we have to do is bring everything from Wikipedia to Wikidata and we're done, right? Unfortunately, it's not that easy. So what we are looking at, if we look back at the Urdu Wikipedia article, is basically this part, the actual heart of the article, the actual article text. And representing text in a format like Wikidata is really hard. It's actually technically it might be possible, but practically it's not. We really need different notation to capture what we have in this kind of text. And the problem is that the expressivity of a knowledge graph doesn't really allow for narration. It doesn't allow for reference by description. It doesn't allow for redundancy. Let's go through these in a little bit of detail. First, starting with narration. So this is a paragraph from the Marie Curie article in English. It's from her biography. It's when Pierre Curie and Marie Curie started seeing each other, at the start of the relationship. Their mutual passion for science brought them increasingly closer, and they began to develop feelings for one another. capturing that in a knowledge graph is pretty hard. Eventually, Pierre proposed marriage, but at first Sklodowska did not accept, as she was still planning to go back to her native country. Curie, however, declared that he was ready to move with her to Poland, even if it meant being reduced to teaching French. How will you capture it meant to be reduced to teaching French? Is this a hypothetical that never happened? How would you put that into knowledge graph? Meanwhile, for the 1894 summer break, Sklodowska returned to Warsaw, where she visited her family. She was still laboring under the illusion that she would be able to work in her chosen field in Poland, but she was denied a place at Krakow University because of sexism in academia. She was still laboring under the illusion. You need pretty heavy theory of mind in order to be able to express this in knowledge graph and how to capture this kind of thing. Never mind denying a place at Krakow. A letter from Pierre convinced her to return to Paris to pursue a PhD. At Sklodowska's insistence, Curie had written up his research on magnetism and received his own doctorate in March 1895. He was also promoted to professor at the school. On July 26, 1895, they were married in Score. Curie's dark blue outfit, worn instead of the bridal gown, would serve her for many years as a laboratory outfit. There's a lot of information here which we can turn into a knowledge graph. We can say, oh, Marie Curie applies to the Krakow University, this is to Krakow, but it was denied because of sexism and activity. We have Marie, who is the applicant of this application. We have the marriage, which happened on July 26, 1895 in Score, which involves Pierre and Marie Curie, where she was born, her native country. So we can put a lot of this information into a knowledge graph, even more than we see here. But even if we do that, we only get like a skeleton of the text. There's a lot of in the text which we still didn't capture, and which is really hard to capture in a knowledge graph. And even if we do that, now that we have this knowledge graph is a small look at the whole knowledge graph. Remember, Wikidata has more than 1.3 billion such links. How do we figure out which of those links we actually should be pulling together in order to create the text again, in order to create the narrative? In which order to do that? This is a very difficult problem. There's a lot of research going on in trying to solve it, but it's a very difficult problem. Second part, reference by descriptions. So a lot of the topics that you see referenced in the Wikipedia article, like for example, Curie's dark blue outfit, actually don't have Wikipedia articles, don't have Wikidata items. You could create Wikidata items for all of these, but many of those items are just mentioned once and never referred to again. So it's very, we would be creating a lot of IDs, a lot of IDs, and many of those would be described now very deeply. Natural language has this great way of doing, noun phrases, which can just refer to a thing without necessarily having big commitments to identity and so on. So we can talk here about Curie's dark blue outfit and use it in the sentence, use it in this context, and then after that forget about it without having to create and maintain its own page. We already have more than 90 million items in Wikidata. If we would be turning all the references in Wikipedia to items, this would be a huge task. Also interesting here is actually the word Curie itself. It refers in this case to Marie Curie, even though the last time we referred to Curie, it referred to Pierre Curie. We have referred to Sklodowska before, but because they married in the sentence between, actually, yeah, just in the sentence before that, now the reference to Curie can also refer to Marie, and for us as humans, it's actually unambiguous, because it's pretty unambiguous, because we can assume that it is Marie Curie who's wearing the bridal gown and who is referred to as her instead of Pierre Curie, who would be referred to as he and probably would have worn a bridal gown. So this is a super subtle and pretty complicated switch, which we as humans don't even notice, but for a computer it would be pretty difficult to understand this, and also to generate this, right? That we can refer to Madikiri as Sklodowska before the wedding, and then later to Curie. And within the article, even before, means like, well, just in the biography section, if we have other articles about her work first, we would still not refer to her as Skłodowska unless she was a Skłodowska, maybe when she was doing the work and so on. So deciding the reference is actually pretty difficult. And in the knowledge graph, we just have a single node for Marie Skłodowska-Curie, and it doesn't really tell you how to actually refer to those. This is another issue that we would have with natural language. The natural language text covers, where we need a better notation to actually cover these kind of things. The third point was redundancy, or stating things that are already inferable. So if you look at Wikipedia, so as you know, we have articles about Madikiri in more than 100 languages. So in almost all of these, if we look at the article, within the top few paragraphs before the table of contents, in all the different languages, be it English, German, Italian, Spanish, Chinese, Russian, Arabic, and even in the small Urdu sentence that in the small Urdu sentence that we saw before, like here, or in Arabic, in all of those, there's one piece of information about Marie Curie, which means it has been written independently into those articles and seems to be really, really important, which is this here. Marie Curie is the only person to win the Nobel Prize in 2 different scientific fields. This is information which is not presented explicitly in Wikidata at all. Yes, in Wikidata, we have all the Nobel Prize winners. We know when they won it, we know in which field they won it, and so on. And you could infer, you could make a query like, oh, who won the Nobel Prize more than once? Who won the Nobel Prize more than once in different scientific fields? I mean, and we would see, oh, it's only Marie Curie. So this information is implicitly in the knowledge graph. But a knowledge graph like Wikidata is really bad at expressing this kind of information explicitly. This is what we're doing in natural language all the time. A lot of the information in Wikipedia, if you go through it, is actually highly redundant with the other information in Wikipedia. And that's okay. I mean, we as human readers, we really like redundancy, particularly if it helps with the narrative. And that's something that we need to capture. We need a notation to capture this kind of redundant information and have it represented. So how could we do all of this? So let's take a look at this particular example. Marie Curie was the only person who received the Nobel Prize in 2 different scientific categories. And what you see here, well, we have a lot of hand waving, but also it's totally inspired by grammatical framework, as you will notice. We will learn during the summer school and the other courses how this exactly works in grammatical framework, and we are trying to apply a lot of those ideas exactly to for abstract Wikipedia as well. In fact, we want to use as much of grammatical framework as possible for the project itself. So let's see how we do this, how we plan to do this in abstract Wikipedia. So similar to the abstract representation in grammatical framework, we want to have a kind of frame that captures the sentence. We want to say, okay, the only person that, and then we have 2 slots on that. One is the person, and the person is Marie Curie, and the condition is, oh, this is complex. So let's again take another frame or constructor, as we call it, and this is the award winning. We're talking about the award, it's a Nobel Prize. So we have Marie Curie, who is the only person that won an award, the Nobel Prize, and the type of Nobel Prize. Oh, here, let's take a noun phrase with modifiers. We take a determiner, which is true. We have modifiers, different and scientific. We have the head of the noun phrase, which is category. And this is then aims to represent this sentence in an abstract way, abstracting from the concrete natural language. It doesn't really matter if this really captures exactly this sentence, or if it captures, for example, this sentence. The only one who ever won Nobel Prizes in 2 different sciences was Marie Curie. What is important is that the meaning of those 2 sentences is the same, and what is important is that this same representation, yes, we're definitely mixing semantic and syntax here. I I'm not saying this is exactly how we're going to do it, but it's up to the community to actually create the constructors. Yeah, I'm happy actually to have improvements to the example. Thanks for the comment. So what is important is that we can take the same abstract representation and also create, for example, a representation in my native Croatian. Madikiri je jedina osoba koja je dobila Nobelovu nagradu u 2 različita znanstvena područja. So we can have the same abstract representation, create different natural languages. And in reality, we wouldn't actually have, only person tab in person. What we would have in abstract Wikipedia is we would use ZIDs, QIDs from Wikidata, ZIDs from Wiki functions, which will come to later, and so on, and have all of this represented. So it would be as multilingual as Wikidata is. All of these things would have labels in the different languages, so you can also see the abstract content be represented in different natural languages and edited in different natural languages. It's not that you can only edit it in English and turn it then into other languages, but all of these would be editable in any language, which is really, really important for Wikipedia, that everyone can share in the content and contribute to it and maintain it. So we have those constructors, which are pretty much like in grammatical framework, things that take specific types, so only person taking person, and a verb phrase, returning a clause, where we have also and then you can have award winning, which returns a verb phrase, which means we can put the award winning into the condition of the only person dead, and so on. So so those constructors would be created by the community, and it's up to the community to make sure that we don't mix syntax as here with semantics as here, or how to separate. So all these constructors can be created by the community, can be extended by the community and maintained and then built together. And then for all these constructors, we would need renderers or linearizers, I think they are called in grammatical framework. We would take a specific constructor and somehow turn it into language. This is a lot of hand waving here, obviously. There would be, it's in many languages, it would be much more complex. And there would be, you need to take care of things like agreement and so on. And we hope that things like the a resource grammar library can really help us with getting those things up and quick and running. So we have those constructors, we have the content, we have the renderers, and the idea is that then we store this new notation using the constructors, creating abstract content. For example, in Wikidata, this is something we need to discuss with the Wikidata community still if they actually want this content. Store it, for example, in Wikidata, use the renderers to turn it into natural language, and this natural language, this generated text then can be used by the Wikipedias to fill in their gaps, to fill in the places where they're missing information. So in English, obviously, wouldn't really need the sentence. In other languages, it might be missing. And we can just replace the renderer then with a different renderer in a different language, and we get different content which can then be used by different Wikipedias. And because we can't write all those renderers in all those different languages, the idea is that we create a new project called Wiki functions, where we allow people to actually write those renderers, because they're just functions. Where we allow those people to actually create those renderers and maintain them, where they also will be creating the constructors and so on. So what we get now is an architecture where we have renderers, one per language, and constructors, for example, in English, in Swedish, in Amharic, and so on. We have the content, one per item, where we have one content for Madikiri and an abstract content representation. And we see that the languages and the content are now completely independent from each other. So the content is only created once, the renderers are only created once for each set. And this allows us to actually reduce the cost of Wikipedia indeed to the addition that we were looking for. We have 20 million topics, and this is basically the cost reference. If we have 300 languages, is comparable to the 20 million topics, a much minor cost. So we get the So bringing the cost of creating and sharing and some of all human knowledge comes now down to something that is actually doable by the communities, because we know it, because it's something that already the English Wikipedia does in a similar order of magnitude. So we're getting to a place where we can actually do it for all of the languages. This is the current architecture of the system. We have the Wikipedias, which are accessing the items in Wikidata and displaying the information, like, for example, the doctor or supervisor of Madikiri. And we have also lexemes in Wikidata. We'll come to that in a little moment. So what we need to add is a place to store the abstract content in Wikidata and have this new project, Wiki Functions, where we will have the renderers and the constructors, and that they can be used by Wikidata in order to create the content for Wikipedia. Our desiderata for the whole system is that the content, the constructors, the renderers are all maintained by the community. They are all created by the community. They are not, created by a small team in San Francisco, but everyone can actually contribute to those. And particularly for the renderers, this is necessary, actually, because we can't scale to 300 languages. Important that why we're not using machine learning in a massive way is that the system can be understood and edited predictably. If you see an error, you still should be able to actually go and click on edit and fix the error. This is what made Wikipedia grow so big. And we want to be able to support graceful degradation, meaning just because we're missing a specific lexeme for a specific language, we shouldn't block the whole article from being created, but only whatever is needed to be blocked in because we are missing that particular word. We also have a few reasons for optimism for why this is not completely crazy, the whole thing. So first, we're dealing with a single genre. We're talking about encyclopedic text. We don't have to have, hard-steering manifestos. It's not about prose or lyrics or whatever. We're talking about encyclopedic text, which can be a little bit boring from time to time. That's okay. Our main goal is to transfer information and knowledge. Also an advantage, and this is different to what Grammatical Framework is doing, we don't need to actually parse and understand language. We assume that you can edit the abstract content directly and then translate it into the natural languages. Parsing and understanding language, which is much, much harder than generating language, we can skip on that. If we can build a system that can do both, that would be awesome, but we won't be blocking on this. Also, we can start very simple. We have a very low baseline. As you have seen, we don't even have an article in Hausa for Marie Curie. So, even just like a paragraph or two about her would already bring a lot of knowledge, which would be already more than we have in Amharic even. So in many, many languages, the baseline is so low that we're pretty sure that we will achieve some advantages, that we will achieve some more content for a lot of the topics I have in Wikipedia. The whole incentive infrastructure is surprisingly promising, and I can talk about this in detail. So one of the things is that we currently, for most of the languages, there is no reason to believe that this language will have a complete and comprehensive encyclopedia. If you write in Hausa, if you write in Amharic, even if you write in Croatian, you might think, why should I write in, in Croatian and Amharic and so on? This Wikipedia isn't growing as quickly. It doesn't have that much information. It's maybe not read by so many people. It's much more, it might be much more prestige to it if I edit instead the French Wikipedia or the English Wikipedia or the Russian Wikipedia. So a lot of the people who would actually contribute to a language like Hausa or Amharic or Malayalam may choose a different language to actually contribute. And so the big Wikipedias like English are overly represented and get even more. So we have some kind of Peter principle going on here, that the big ones are getting even more attention, getting even more support. With this structure that we're promising here, we might actually create more incentives to contribute to the smaller languages, because now suddenly it becomes much more effective, much more efficient to contribute to those, because you are actually reaching many, many more people. You have now suddenly the choice, do I contribute the history of my home country in English or in my home language, or do I contribute to the abstract commons, which makes it then available to the whole world? So we are really shaking up the incentive infrastructure behind the different language Wikipedias and hope to achieve more people contributing, because we believe it's actually feasible to contribute to a small Wikipedia, and also that more people will contribute to different languages than we currently do today. And after all, our goal is pretty attractive. After we are working towards a world where everyone can share in the sum of all knowledge. So this is what we want to achieve, abstract Wikipedia. Now, how do we want to achieve this? Constructors, content renderers. I can explain this to you, in the summer school on grammatical framework within half an hour what those means. But the problem is, so one thing that made Wikipedia really succeed is its tagline. It's an encyclopedia that everyone can edit. Everyone immediately understands it. They don't necessarily like the idea of an encyclopedia that everyone can edit, but everyone understands it immediately. You can put them in front of Wikipedia and they will immediately know what they can do if they want to in order to make it better. They know what kind of articles should be there and so on, because we all have a shared understanding of what an encyclopedia is. We don't have a shared understanding of what constructors and abstract content are and renderers and so on. But if we squint a little bit, we actually see that constructors are very similar to types in programming languages. Content really are like values of those types, and renderers, they're just functions. And types, values, functions, this is a language which is available to many more people than constructors and renderers and so on. So if we squint, and we also get to a project which is actually much more comprehensive, which is much bigger than just natural language generation. And this is what we're aiming with Wiki Functions. Wiki Functions aims to be a site for the automatic answering of questions. We'll get to what I mean with that in a moment. It's the first new Wikimedia project since 2012 when Wikidata was launched. We're hoping to launch this year. Might happen, might not, let's see. And it will be completely multilingual in terms of natural languages, similar to Wikidata, but also in terms of programming languages. I come to both of these soon. So, what are functions? Mathematically, a function is a relation between each element of one set to an element of another set. This is correct, but not particularly enlightening. Let's try a different definition. So a function is something that takes an input x, runs some deterministic procedure f over the input, and returns an output f of x. That is maybe a bit more understandable. So we have something that gets processed and then return an output. Okay, but what really is important is that functions are a type of knowledge. And the big tech companies know already how useful that is. The big tech, they give you already some access to some of those functions. For example, you can go to Siri and ask them how many teaspoons in 2 tablespoons, and Siri will run a function for you, admittedly a pretty simple function, and tell you 2 tablespoons are 6 teaspoons. So we have here Siri running a function for you. Or you can go to Microsoft Bing and ask, when was the Wikimedia Foundation founded? And Bing is a search engine, but instead of doing a search right now, it actually runs a function on its knowledge graph, Satori, which is like Wikidata, but internal to Microsoft, and it retrieves the date, June 20th, 2003, and answers your question. So here we have actually a function being executed against against the Bing knowledge graph and giving an answer instead of a search result. Now I can take this date, for example, June 20th, 2003, and say, how many days since June 20th? Go to DuckDuckGo and ask this question. And DuckDuckGo, again, it doesn't run a search on its web index, even though it's a search site. It actually executes a function. It says how many days between June 20th, 2003 and today, well, okay, a few days ago, it will tell you, oh, that's more than 6,600 days. So this is not a search result. Nowhere on the web do we have this information. But DuckDuckGo actually runs this function for you. Here's my favorite example. If you go to Google and ask for the volume of a pyramid, you get directly in the Google search result this beautiful visualization. So you can see a sketch of a pyramid. You have the different variables that are relevant, the base length, the width, the height. You actually see it in the sketch where they are. If you can enter the values for that, it highlights you in the sketch what you are actually entering. You see the formula for calculating volume. Here, the formula, it also highlights what you're entering. It substitutes the values that you are entering, and it calculates the result for you. So there's obviously a lot of love that has gone into answering this function. This is a function being run. Again, it's not a search result on Google, but they're running a function for you and giving you the answer. But as soon as you get out of, what a PM at Google or at Apple and so on has decided is are the functions that are good for you. For example, if I ask how many women have an article in Hausa Wikipedia, the question that we have seen before, we get to 10 blue links. There's nothing answering here the thing. So we really completely rely on whoever creates those functions, decides on which functions to be answered, implements them, and keeps them and maintains them, which is done with the tech within the tech commons. We can't really contribute ourselves to this kind of functional knowledge to grow. And maybe it's even lucky that we only get the 10 blue links. We could get much worse. For example, we can ask for the dictionary entry for water, and we get all this nice information. We get like, okay, water, we get the plural waters, we get the different senses of water, it's a noun, and so on. We get a lot of information about water. So we have it for English. But then we go to another language, for example. We ask, okay, so what is the plural genitive of Estonian vesi? Vesi is the Estonian word for water. And Google goes to its search index, so this time it can't run a function because it actually doesn't know how to create plural genitives, but it has a big search index. So it looks into the search index, it finds, oh, I have in Dictionary the page for vesi. And look, there's a table which says genitive and plural. So it tells me, oh yeah, so the genitive plural of vesi is vesie. Sounds great. The problem is it's completely wrong. Unfortunately, this is not in Estonian. It's in Votic. Votic is a language that has about 4 native speakers left, unfortunately. So it's a very endangered language. It has, and because all the different languages in Dictionary are on the same page, Google can figure out actually that it's slipped into the wrong language and answers you with the plural genitive in a different language. So, and there's no way for you looking at this page to know that this is actually wrong. So it's easily misleading what Google does here in this case. So functions are knowledge. The important part of that is that knowledge is something that the Wikimedia Foundation cares about. Knowledge is in our mission. We want to allow everyone to share in the sum of all knowledge. But also knowledge really is power. Deciding which functions are run by the different technical means that you have, not allowing you to extend those functions so that they have the power to tell you which functions you can run, decides on which questions are easily answerable for you and which ones are not. It decides who uses the sources, which sources are being used for answering those questions and so on. So they have all the control over which functions you can run, how to run them, and all of these things. You don't have the power about this if we completely rely. And really, functions are not just power. Functions are a superpower, because functions are not like, a Wikipedia article with static knowledge in it that you can read and then process. But functions allow you to ask questions that no one has ever asked before, and to give you, with confidence, a reliable answer, because you're following a procedure. You're putting the trust in the procedure of this function to answer you a question you have never asked before. So if you ask, for example, what is 17,312,215 plus 26,512? If you ask it to a computer, you'll be very confident in their answer, even though no one in the world has ever maybe asked this question before. No one in the world has ever checked whether the computer will give you the right result. You still trust in it because, well, you have a function procedure which is running here. You trust that the procedure is correct, and therefore the result is correct. So functions are a superpower. They're really answer questions that no one has asked before, which is knowledge. They create knowledge. And we want to democratize this superpower. We want to give this superpower to everyone. Everyone should be able to create functions, to use functions, to maintain functions. This is an early mock-up of how wiki functions could look like. So we might have, functions sorted by topic, in mathematics, in language, in logic, and so on. Let's take a look at a few functions, how this could look like. Again, all of these are early mock-ups. This is not really how it will look like. For every function, we have a set ID, just like we have the QIDs in Wikidata. And we, for example, we could have a function that converts tablespoons into teaspoons. I just see the comment from Inari that Google is also very wrong for what is the plural genitive of Finnish vesi, and it's giving the Faroese word for toilet. So here we go. That might be embarrassing. So back to this. So here we can convert, for example, tablespoons into teaspoons. So we have an input of tablespoon, we have a return of teaspoons. Every function has a set ID. We have different implementations for it. So this would be what Siri was doing earlier with translating tablespoons into teaspoons. Or we have here the function that DuckDuckGo was doing. How many days between two dates? We have as an input a from date, a to date, and returns you a quantity in days. So, for example, okay, between February 2021, and so on, the 10 days and 9 days because of leap years and so on. And you think, oh man, who needs that? I mean, calculating days between, that's so trivial. I actually did. I checked on GitHub the other day, and for functions that calculate how many days between, and about half of the functions that I found got the leap dates rule wrong. So, the implementations are often not right. Having a catalog, a library where we can share in those implementations, where everyone can use them easily, I think that would be a great benefit to the quality of code in the world. Let's take a closer look at one specific function. I take a super simple one, multiplication. Multiplication, here I define it only over positive integers. So this multiplication takes two positive integers and returns a positive integer. We have three different implementations, one in JavaScript, one in Python, and one in composition. We currently actually support already JavaScript and Python. So those are the two languages that we do support. We plan to support many, many more programming languages in the future. So how does the JavaScript multiplication look like? Well, it just uses the native JavaScript multiplication. Very easy. The same thing for Python, basically the same thing. A little bit different of syntax. Now composition. Composition is the interesting one. It's not a fancy new programming language you didn't hear about yet, but rather in composition we compose functions that are already available in Wiki functions together in order to get higher level effects. So multiplication can, for example, be defined as recursive call to multiplication, basically, and addition. So now the interesting thing is, since all of these are functions in Wiki functions, there's an if function, there's an is0 function, there's an add function, there's obviously a multiply function, and so on. Since all of these are functions in Wiki functions, and they're actually represented by ZIDs with labels in different languages, you can take this implementation and also view this implementation, for example, in German. So this is the same implementation, the same content, but it's being displayed in German or in Bengali, for example, or in any of the other 300 or 400 languages that we aim to support. You cannot just read the implementation in Bengali, but you can also write it in Bengali. You can maintain it in Bengali. For a lot of people, creating implementations today is often blocked by the fact that they need to speak English, because basically every programming language in the world is based on English. We know, research has shown that this is actually a major blocker for many people who contribute to functions. with Wiki functions, we want to make it possible for the first time that in 300 or 400 languages, you can actually contribute code, that you can actually contribute implementations in your native language, that you don't have to learn a different language in order just to contribute code. And this is particularly important because we want to reach so many more people. Wiki functions wants to democratize access to functions heavily. We want to reach out many more people than today, to allow to access functions, but also to create functions, to maintain functions. We want to allow to access those functions from many different modalities. We have seen that we can, for example, support obviously the website and so on, but we could also support, for example, voice assistants, or in a spreadsheet, or in the mobile app and so on. There are many modalities that you can access all the information in Wiki functions. In particular, we want to build a natural language narration library for 300+ languages. Now, getting people who know programming and who know a language good and so on to create those natural language narration libraries and are willing to support an open source project like this one, those are unicorns who are pretty rare. But if we can make it so that people who don't know how to code currently can actually contribute to Wiki functions, we could reach a much bigger audience. And this is how we might scale to actually those 300 different languages. And the funny thing is that a lot of people think that STEM capabilities correlate with programming capabilities, but they actually don't. It is natural language aptitude that correlates with programming languages learning. So it is exactly those people who know languages, who contribute to Wikipedia, who contribute to Wiktionary and so on, which are also the ones who are probably most capable of actually contributing. They just don't believe it themselves. They usually believe, I don't know computers, I don't know math, so I don't try to code. So we need to actually frame this whole project. We need to crack this nut of how we reach, and I'm super happy if you have ideas on how to do this, of what is the conceptual model for Wiki functions that could work for reaching out to those people so that we can actually get natural language narrations in all those languages. So this is Wiki functions, aiming to have all those functions for the different languages and so on. One thing that we rely on will be the lexicographic data in Wikidata to actually build the content for the different natural languages. So what do I mean with lexicographic data in Wikidata? This is, in Wikidata, we don't have just information about things in the world, like, for example, Madikiri or Paris or Singapore. We also have information about all the words in the world. This is something that we started in 2018, collecting lexicographic information. This is not the entry about the concept about water, the thing that we drink, but this is the entry about the English noun water. And we have then, for example, information like what is it derived from? It's derived from Indo-European root. So we can actually take this information of all the different words that are derived from the same roots, from the same pi root here, and we see it in the different languages and how they come from. This is not Wesi here because Wesi is from a different language group, but we can see the English, the German, the Russian words over here, and so on. And this is also done just by using the Sparkle endpoint, because we have all this information now in RDF and make it available. Also for Sparkle, you can query it and get those graphs out. So we have this information about words now for the different languages. And we have, for example, also the senses for the word water, or the different senses, for example, that we currently have in Wikidata is that this is the common liquid substance. The second sense is a chemical compound of hydrogen and oxygen. And the third sense is it's a body of water, usually a river, a lake, or an ocean. So I cross the water or whatever would be using this third sense. So we have the different senses given with different glosses and different languages in it. But we also have the information for the different forms. So there's the singular form water, there's a plural form waters. English isn't particularly interesting with regard to forms, but this is where we, example, we would take information of goose and geese, so we have irregular plurals. We would just get it from the lexicographic data in Wikidata and use it for generating language. It's more interesting if we actually go to a language like Estonian. So we have vesi, and here we have somewhere the genitive plural, which is actually vete. And we have here a few of the different forms of vesi in Estonian. In fact, there are several dozens of different forms. I think about 30 or 40 different forms that exist on Estonian nouns. And all of those would be given in Wikidata, so we can go and access them. Wikidata currently has more than 500,000 lexicographical entries, lexemes as we call them, in almost 800 different languages. They are represented with almost 10 million forms and 140,000 different senses on those lexicographic entries. The lexicographical data in Wikidata has seen more than 3 million edits so far by almost 2,000 contributors coming from all over the world. And we currently have about 130 active contributors, which is very comparable to how the dictionaries are doing. Another way to visualize the coverage we have in lexicographical data in Wikidata is if you look at, we can look, for example, we can take Wikipedia as a corpus, here for example English and Estonian, and see how many words that are appearing in that corpus, how many tokens of those are already covered by the lexicographic data. We can see, oh, in English Wikipedia we cover more than 90% of the tokens. In Estonian we cover 80% of the tokens. It's different if we go for unique tokens. There we get much smaller coverage, and it's also very different for other languages. So there's a lot of languages where we still can use a lot of the we can use help from community members, from you, for example, to actually contribute lexicographical data to Wikidata. Another way to visualize the coverage is we take a sentence, like for example this Martin Luther King quote, "The time is always right, do what is right." And we can annotate it with the lexicographical entry in Wikidata, annotate it with the specific form that is being used and the specific sense that is being meant here. So, for example, this word right is the English adjective. We are using here the positive, and the sense of correct, not wrong, appropriate. And so we could kind of annotate all this kind of text with the lexicographical data that we have in Wikidata. So we already have the dictionaries. And you're probably wondering, how do these tie together? And the dictionaries don't tie together yet, so we're working on this to tie those things much closer together. So in the dictionaries, and here comes the problem. So this is in the English dictionary, the entry for the Estonian word vesi. We see this declension table here, where it has all the different forms for vesi. And this table in the English dictionary is created through a template. So we have a template that can be used for a specific paradigm of Estonian nouns and gives me the right suffixes for the different cases and numbers here. So this is how we create it. But there's no API that allows you actually to access, for example, or give me the additive plural or something, whatever. You really have to dig into the English dictionary and see how they're doing it here in order to get a specific case. There's a category on English dictionary which collects more than 48 different templates for the different paradigms in Estonian. So you see there's a lot of information going on in those templates. And the first thing, this is only available to the English dictionary. We have, I think, 167, almost 200 dictionaries. I mean, dictionaries in different languages. And each of them try to have an Estonian dictionary instead of its dictionary. So the Estonian dictionary in the English dictionary is independent from the Estonian dictionary in the German dictionary is independent from the Estonian dictionary, a dictionary in the Estonian dictionary, which also exists, or the Croatian dictionary, and so on. So all these nice templates here are only usable by the English dictionary. If we go to German, we actually get a Lua module with about 300 lines of code to create all those different declensions for Estonian nouns. And the funny thing is, even though we have this beautiful module that creates all these forms, the German dictionary actually doesn't have an entry for Vesi, for water. It only has about 957 Estonian lexemes, the nouns using those modules sometimes and sometimes not. English has 9,000 lexical entries for Estonian. Estonian has 10,000 lexical entries. Wikidata has 80,000 entries for Estonian, including about 8,000 verbs. So you see that Wikidata actually has much more coverage in Estonian than any of the other dictionaries does. In Estonian itself, we get translations of Vesi in many different languages, but the forms, the declension table is actually pretty small. And in this case, it's actually maintained completely locally. And it makes sense that it's so small, because if you're actually an Estonian speaker, you probably only need these forms and the rest is regular and you can just create it. So, and given that you're reading Estonian dictionary, you are probably an Estonian speaker. So this is actually sufficient. In other languages, though, we simply don't have this much coverage. For example, in Russian, we only have 2 forms. We have the singular and the plural. We don't even have any of the cases. And in most languages, like here, for example, in Spanish, we only have the translation to agua. We don't have any form at all. It says it's Vesi, but that's it. You have to figure out the forms yourself. You don't know which paradigms it is. We don't have any information. So across the dictionaries, and in most dictionaries, we don't have any entry for Vesi at all. So the core problem here is just like with Wikipedia. The cost of dictionary is tremendous. We want to have all the words of all the languages and the forms and senses in every single language, and all of this being independently. This is a huge number. So even if you assume like 100,000 words in a good dictionary, we want to cover 7,500 languages. This is what English dictionary does. We have about 20 forms of senses on average. I don't know if this is true. But we have 200 dictionaries. So we can get rid of a lot of those things. You know, we can get rid of the different dictionaries. You can get maybe rid of the different forms and senses. You can generate them automatically, just like the grammatical framework does, and reduce, you know, the whole cost by orders of magnitude, and have this whole information be centralized. So the hope is we could scale up dictionary by centralized access to forms and senses in an improved Wikidata, and then display those in the different dictionaries. So the dictionaries would still be the main goal to access this data, but we could actually keep it in a centralized place. And we can have something called Lexical Masks that I want to talk about in a moment. So Lexical Mask is a project that we published when I was still at Google. And the idea is here for entering the information in Wikidata. Currently, there's not much support. You can go in and say, okay, I need a form. The form is to be the singular genitive. Now I enter it. This is kind of obviously repetitive for the language, because Estonian nouns or English nouns in any language, any part of speech, has a specific structure. And this is what Lexical Mask is trying to capture. So we can then, from this Lexical Mask, then create, for example, a form where you can just enter the information. This is now Basque here, did you see? And the different forms that the Basque, I think, verb has. And you can then enter it and then store it at once and have all the forms being created for you. We can turn them into entity schemas, which is language called checks, which can then be used to check whether a specific entry or specific activity actually follows, if it has all the forms that it needs. And we can then find a list of all the language lexicographic entries that follow the identity schema, the ones that did not pass and why they did not pass, and so on. And so we can, based on those forms, we can actually check the quality of the existing data, but also create an UI that helps you entering more data. This is one thing that you want to cover for more and more languages. We already have forms for, I think, like about a dozen languages or something. If you want to create forms for more languages, please contact me. I'm happy to contact you with the team at Google working on those forms, so that we can use those forms for that we can create more forms. Also, these forms can be used then for other purposes. They in general written in a declarative language that can allow the creation of those entry templates, but also the creation of the checking and so on, and can probably also used to check the grammatical frameworks if they're consistent or not. This could be an interesting thing where we could also work together, and to have the forms and the entries in grammatical framework, for example, interact with each other. So this is how we want to scale the lexicographical data in Wikidata, in order to have more words available for abstract Wikipedia. So what are the early milestones that we hope to achieve once Wiki Functions is out, which is hopefully happening in the next few months? So we'll take a look at a few early milestones. One is paradigms. We already took a quick look how it's done in Wiktionary. Abstract descriptions and abstract glosses. And this is the part where I'm really happy to discuss more. So for paradigms, we have seen that the paradigms are currently either written manually, for example, in the Estonian Wikipedia or in the Wiktionary or in the Russian Wiktionary, or they're created through a Lua module, like in the German Wiktionary, or they're created through a slew of templates, as in the English Wiktionary. We would like to actually centralize all those paradigms in Wiki Functions, so that you can, for example, take a base form of an Estonian genitive of type 15, and it would create you the proper genitive plural, for example. So all these functions can be actually implemented in Wiki Functions, and the nice thing about implementing Wiki Function is, as we said before, you actually don't have to speak English in order to create those implementations. You can also do it in a language that is more likely to speak Estonian. Here, for example, we actually have an implementation in Swedish, and how it would work, for example. So by centralizing those paradigms in Wiki Functions, or we could also use here an implementation, actually, as you have seen, the implementation can be in different languages. And here, grammatical framework would be an obvious, very interesting language to add. Since grammatical framework is also a programming language, we could just add it here and then create the Estonian genitive plural through the grammatical framework paradigms and access them there, and have these also then available and have provide us with coverage. Then we want to centralize those paradigms in Wiki Functions, make them available in Wikidata to create and check the different declensions and inflections there on the different words, and then make this again available and accessible in the Wiktionaries, so that we have much more coverage in the Wiktionaries about all the different forms and languages. So this is like the first goal that we want to achieve, because this is the first obvious step that we also need to do in order to do all of the other ones. If we want to be able to create natural language checks for abstract content, we must be knowledgeable about those different forms. This is something that we are probably aiming for early next year to start implementing. The second thing is abstract descriptions. We have seen earlier how Wikidata looks like. So one thing that we have in Wikidata is all those different labels in different languages for the different QIDs. So this is the University of Lagos, for example. We have those the labels of the university in different languages, and we have the description of the university in different languages. And this description is often meaning the same thing in the different languages. So we have here Nigeriansk Universitet in Danish. We have Una Universidad en Lagos in Spanish, which is slightly different because it says university in Lagos instead of university in Nigeria. We have Université au Niger in French, and so on. So they often have similar content. And when the content is not the same, like for example, the Spanish one or the English one, which has the word public, it's often accidental that there's a difference. It's not like something inherently in English which wants to make us say public, or something in Spanish which wants to say as Lagos instead of Nigeria here. It's just an accidental difference. So as I said, Wikidata has currently 94 million items, and we support more than 400 languages. In fact, this means we would have more than 40 billion descriptions in Wikidata. And in fact, we do have 2 billion descriptions. So we're not doing too bad on this. So 2 billion out of 40 billion possible descriptions. But we're still missing 95% of the descriptions. And also the current 2 billion descriptions are often created by bots. And those bots don't scale the same way that the community does, because there are only so few bot operators. So you can put, you can either entrust the bot operators to do all this, which means that you're not democratizing this power, but you're keeping it to a small number of people. Or we could try something by connecting this to wiki functions and to have in abstract, because those things, those descriptions are usually just noun phrases. And similar to the labels, sometimes they're just, short noun phrases, which means they're actually amenable to be done with abstract descriptions. We have to use the constructors that we need to create for abstract Wikipedia anyway, and have them here be in an abstract representation, and then be able to create those descriptions for many different languages. Arne has actually done something similar for universities in grammatical framework, and shown how well and how easy this actually can do, and we can increase the coverage. We could do it like out of the box right now, increase the coverage for many different languages that is already missing. So this is something we would really love to capture early on, to have those descriptions be represented in an abstract way, and then have functions and wiki functions translated to the different languages. There's quite a few decisions to be made how we actually cache this, how this gets propagated, and so on. But this is, seems like another early milestone that we want to capture. The last milestone I want to talk about, abstract glosses. So you've seen earlier the entry for water, for the English noun water in Wikidata, and how it has different senses. So a sense in Wikidata is captured through a gloss in different languages. So you would have an English gloss for the sense, which is common liquid substance. You would have a German gloss for the sense, which is Wasser. You would have a Spanish, which is agua, and so on. Now, could we, and obviously here the glosses are actually much less consistent than the descriptions are, and this is why I'm putting this as a little bit later milestone. Could we capture those glosses in an abstract way? Can we create functions? We could create those functions, because we could obviously reduce here a lot of repetition across languages as well. And if we do that, and this is the interesting part, how crazy is actually this idea? If we be able to capture all the senses in a dictionary, and actually in many different dictionaries in many different languages, all the senses in an abstract representation, how close are we then to actually getting a machine-readable understanding of the whole dictionary, which is something that, for example, Levichka and Goddard have been working on for many years. Can we create a language that allows us to capture formally the meaning of every single word? It's like a bit crazy. I'm not sure if this will really take us there, if glosses can really work like this, but it's certainly something that we would love to work on. Yeah, WordNet would be obviously a very strong contender for starting on this. So those are the milestones. We have decided on 5 focus languages that we want to work on. This is a decision together with the Wikidata team. The communities have approached us and said they would like to be our focus languages. Those are Bengali and Malayalam, Hausa and Igbo, and Dagbani as a stretch language, because Dagbani has only a small number of speakers. Those are 2 languages from the Indian subcontinent and 3 languages from Western Africa. And those are the languages that we want to work particularly closely with the communities together. We will obviously, from the beginning, start in all the languages Wikimedia supports, but here we want to check particularly early with the communities and feel how our development is working. Our timeline is that this year we are focusing on getting Wiki functions ready to launch, and then launch it hopefully very soon at the end of the year or very early next year. And then in 2022, we really want to add a second focus on abstract Wikipedia, working with on the paradigms, on the abstract description, maybe even the glosses, so that in 2023, we really get to a place where we can write whole articles with Wiki functions in Wikidata, and to have more people share in more knowledge in more languages, and have articles be written across language barriers, to really get a meaningful step closer to a world where everyone can share in the sum of all knowledge. Thank you for all the attention. I have talked a long time now, and happy to discuss, hear questions, go into details on specific parts.
Thank you. Yeah, any questions? You can just unmute yourself, or you can write in the chat. Just floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Denny. There's something new every time. This is the third version I have heard of it, but it doesn't hurt.
It was certainly the longest version I think you have heard.
Hello, Denny. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Arthur.
Yeah. Okay, go on. You can say.
No, I just want to make sure it's you. Okay.
Yeah, it's me. So I was just thinking while you were presenting about, your example about having 2 Nobel Prizes, and how that would be hard to develop a method. Not really hard, we're just not going to develop every method to find this information in the data of Wikidata. But do you ever consider the possibility of people writing like validators for this type of thing? They would have the sentence saying that she has the 2 Nobel Prizes, but also some function to check if that's in the data. Do you think about it?
Yes, and I think that's actually the right approach. This is really a really good idea. So figuring out, checking the data for this kind of sentence, and then deciding whether it's interesting enough automatically to put it into the top of the Wikipedia article or not. I think this is something that we don't want to do automatically for a long time, right? This is something where we want to have human editorial input that says, yeah, information like she won the Nobel Prize, she's the only person who won the Nobel Prize, and yada yada. This we want to have in the top part of the article. But if it's something like she's the only person ever to have been born in Warsaw and and has visited London and is now in the it's now buried in Paris, this is information that who cares? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that each of us is unique about that is not particularly interesting. And making this decision, this is a tough editorial decision that I don't necessarily want to delegate computers. This is something that humans are good at and probably also like to do. But once it's stated, you're completely right. Now that it's stated, and if we put a bit of formal semantics on this kind of like only person dead constructor and so on, we could go actually and figure out if this is indeed the case. We can do a consistency check against a knowledge graph, for example, to see if what we're saying here makes sense. And it doesn't even have to be against the Wikidata knowledge graph. It could be towards the extended knowledge graph of Wikidata, connecting with all these external catalogs and so on, in order to go and check. And this is information you can check, like, does the age make sense? Is the birthday correct? Is it really the case that she's the only one who won the Nobel Prize? Because once you have said it, checking this information is so much easier. Figuring out which information you want to state is the hard editorial process. But this would indeed allow us actually to check much more of Wikipedia automatically, and therefore ensure that the correctness of Wikipedia might be higher than today. And particularly, for articles that don't have that many eyeballs watching them, and increasing the trustworthiness of Wikipedia even further than it is today. So I think this idea of, once we have the content written in abstract content, it makes it so much more amenable to this kind of automatic checks, to this kind of automatic consistency checks that can be then written in, any language outside, or it could be just written Wiki functions. And then we could highlight, for example, oh, the saying here is the only one, but I have here this data, and we see, okay, there's this other one. Maybe something's wrong here. And then just, put it on some notification page and have the community come in and figure out what's going on here. Is this like an intentional inconsistency? Is there some data missing or wrong? And you can check it. I think this is a really good idea.
Yeah, so I think also this example with Marie Curie was very good, because we saw that in the German version it says that Marie Curie is the only person, in addition to Linus Pauling, who has won the Nobel Prize in 2 different areas. So the English was actually incorrect. And then there was yet another language which was saying that she was the only woman who has won. So all of these 3 versions were saying different things, and actually 2 of them were correct, but they said different correct things, and the 3rd one was incorrect.
Actually, all 3 were correct, because the English one was saying she's the only one to win it in 2 different scientific fields. Pauling's 2nd Nobel Prize was in peace, and peace is not a scientific field, unfortunately. So
okay, yeah, sorry. Yes.
So those are 3 different.
Yes.
Those are 3 subtle differences, and all of them are correct.
Okay.
We have some raised hands. Micha first, and Lorette after.
All right. I have so many questions, but I'll start with one very easy one. I wonder if I understood correctly what the relationship actually is between wiki functions and abstract Wikipedia. It seems to me like those are actually 2 separate projects: wiki functions for computation, for functions, right? And then abstract Wikipedia for sort of generating human readable text in multiple languages from language independent meaning representation. So, I mean, do you intend for wiki functions to actually contain, among other types of functions, it would additionally contain functions which linearize sort of meaning objects into text? Yeah, did I understand that correctly?
That is correct, yes. So the idea is that abstract Wikipedia will not actually be a project of its own. There won't be a website, www.abstract.wikipedia, but abstract Wikipedia is more the interplay of wiki functions, Wikidata, and the Wikipedias, all of these 3 together, basically to make the current Wikipedias have access to this kind of generated text. And this would be by using lexicographical data from Wikidata, by using functions from wiki functions. And this is then abstract Wikipedia, which is basically an umbrella term for the interplay between those different projects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I admire your absolute unchained optimism. I mean, you're proposing to do a lot of things which some people would say are so difficult that, I mean, for example, your assumption that Wikipedia articles are a sufficiently limited genre, so it is doable it is imaginable that you can actually build an NLG system which converts sort of meaning independent representations into human readable text. Yeah, I mean, sure, it is a somewhat limited genre, but still it's so broad. Wow, I mean, yeah, I wish you good luck and everything, and I certainly I want this to exist, but I mean, it's such a big job. I know from my experience that writing application grammars in GF is it's only manageable if you keep it small, if you constrain the semantic domain so severely that it becomes really just a small toy grammar, right? If you're writing something bigger, then the complexity can explode so much. And now if you just want to cover all the different things that you say in Wikipedia, ultimately, I know that's not your immediate goal, but ultimately you want to be able to sort of come up with a meaning-independent, language-independent representation of the meanings that are expressed in Wikipedia articles. I mean, that's such a big job. I mean, yeah. So, sorry?
Don't be so pessimistic, Michal.
No, I'm not pessimistic. I'm just.
No, what you were saying that
I'm used to people being pessimistic about these things,
Yeah.
right? So it's
Yeah.
refreshing to see somebody who's actually saying, let's try anyway.
So I want to really say I totally agree with you. It is a big task, and this is why I also want to break it up to a big community. This is why I think that we actually need thousands and tens of thousands of people of contributing to these things in order to do these with those languages. But and I fully agree with you. I don't expect that we will have a decent article on the causes of World War II or how does photosynthesis work in detail or whatever anytime soon. But we might probably have, a paragraph or two about, major persons in the world, like where have they born, what did they do and stuff like this, or about major events and basically every location in the world and so on. So we don't have to start with, can we express the whole article, but we can start with, Hausa doesn't have an article on Marie Curie. Can we do better than that? And I'm pretty sure we can do better than that, Even such information like she's a Polish-French scientist working in physics and chemistry. I'm pretty sure we can get there within a year or something like that in order to express this kind of information. And then we can have the community slowly extending the system. And who knows where we will be in 5 years, in 10 years of, of thousands of people working on this. I have no idea. And we're not replacing the current Wikipedias, we're just, enriching them where they have gaps. This is our goal. So I totally agree. It's a huge task. And I'm just like, well, let's try. Let's see how far we can get. That's basically the goal here.
Yeah, and my other question, or that's not really a question.
Shall we go to Laurette now, and you can?
Yeah, okay, I can. That's not
two questions already.
Yeah, fine. Yeah.
So just raise your hand again, and Laurette can ask her question now.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear more of it. We have enough time for discussion, so I'm happy to hear Michael more. But in Nadia's side, we should just circle a little bit around. Thank you.
Hi, Denny. Thank you very much for that talk. So my question is mostly probably due to my ignorance. I've seen on Wikipedia articles things that say the information in this article is contested, and then eventually at some point there's a kind of a, well, some say this, others say this, and there's some kind of a smoothing out that you can easily do with natural language. And there seems to be some tension, I think, inherent in the idea of, on the one hand, democratizing information, and yet also having some kind of central representation of facts about the world. So everybody can contribute it, and yet it can also, there's also this idea that if somebody gets a hold of the power, the levers to throw out facts or change them. So how would you put those things together? Obviously, the possibilities for this is endless. People can differ on a lot of things, and natural language can smooth it out a bit more easily.
Yes. I'm thinking about this a lot, actually, and I think this is a really important question. So one approach towards answering, so I have actually several approaches towards answering that, so sorry if I jump a little bit around in my answer. One approach towards answering that is that sometimes a specific language might be tied to a specific culture that has a particular point of view on a lexicographical entry, sorry, on an encyclopedic entry article. And in that case, I expect that the actual Wikipedia already has a pretty good article about it, and we're not going to replace this article, right? We're just replacing those places where we don't have content, where we have knowledge gaps in a specific language. So a specific language, if they have a topic they really care about, they can just have they can continue to have the article written in the local language. So that's completely fine. On the other side, so this is kind of, it doesn't have to be completely centralized. You can still have local overrides in a given language, and that's fine. The other thing is that part of my work is inspired by the fact that I come from the Croatian Wikipedia community. And in the South Slavic languages, we have Croatian, we have Serbian, we have Bosnian Wikipedias, we have even a Serbo-Croatian Wikipedia. So we have those 4 Wikipedias, which are languages which are very much mutually understandable. And so the question is, why do we have those 4 Wikipedias? And but it also led to an interesting natural experiment over the last decade and a half, where we see how are these languages now different? And we can see, for example, that those languages are actually have different biases. They represent the events of the 1990s independence war differently. They represent World War II events differently, and so on. So they encode certain biases. And I'm not sure I'm happy about it. I'd rather have a more neutral point of view, and not necessarily a Croatian point of view, a Serbian point of view on World War II and so on. And the funny thing is that for a lot of the topics that these languages care about, their contributors are often also contributing to the English Wikipedia. So you might have Croatian contributors writing on the Croatian Wikipedia, and Serbian contributors writing on the Serbian Wikipedia, and represent their points of view, and then they both go to the English Wikipedia and actually get to a common agreement there. So you have exactly the same dynamic that you just described. You know, you have the centralized data knowledge store, the English Wikipedia, which is like the Wikipedia for with much more reach than the Croatian or the Serbian one, and they actually come together and fight it out, and they get to a more neutral representation than either the Serbian or the Croatian Wikipedia do. So I think the English Wikipedia article is often superior to the Serbian or Croatian Wikipedia article on contentious topics. And unfortunately, this compromise of the English Wikipedia doesn't push back into the Croatian or Serbian Wikipedia at all. Often on the contrary, this very same people who managed to get to a compromise on the English Wikipedia fight even more sternly on the home Wikipedia to not let this compromise trickle back. So there is this kind of tension there, as you say, between having this centralized store where the people from all the languages, in this case because they're using English as the common languages, but in the future then we would have this centralized store where you come from the different languages and fight it out together in the abstract commons, and then we can actually propagate it into the languages. And I think this will be a very interesting contribution towards maybe getting more neutrality across the different languages. As I said before, the local Wikipedia can still decide to override it, but you will have at least the opportunity to check what is actually the abstract commons saying about this topic, and compare it to what you have in the local Wikipedia. Another example here, for example, is that a lot of the differences that you have in the local languages are often not intentional. So, for example, I did the following analysis. I think 2 or 3 years back, the mayor of San Francisco suddenly changed because the previous mayor has died. So I looked at the different Wikipedias to see how did the change of the mayor reflect across languages. And the English Wikipedia was up to date, always to the minute, and it was always having the most current information. And the other Wikipedias lagged, by a day sometimes by a week, sometimes by a month, and so on. Within half a year, about a third of the Wikipedias have switched over to the new mayor, and the others were still having the old mayors. And not just the old mayor who has been mayor for 10 years, but you even had the mayor before that there. So sometimes information on the Wikipedias was like more than a decade old. And the winner was Cebuano Wikipedia, which was listing Dianne Feinstein as the mayor of San Francisco, who was a mayor like in the 70s or 80s, like 30, 40 years ago. So some of the information was just deeply out of date. The good news is none of the mayors were wrong. They were just like out of date. And I don't think this is a cultural difference in the languages that, that there's a specific connection between Cebuano Wikipedia, Cebuano speakers and Dianne Feinstein. I think it's just, there's not enough people to actually keep it up to date, to actually come to a common point of view. I believe that more eyeballs, this is basically Linus' law, that more eyeballs lead to a more neutral representation on the content. And this is basically a kind of an answer to your question about this dynamic between centralizing, allowing everyone to contribute that, and then this kind of effect on the outside. This is just about Wikipedia, and we're not forcing the whole world to follow. Right? You can still have your own blog, your own paper, your own expression which contradicts what's saying in Wikipedia. And often Wikipedia will then integrate, this kind of external publications and so on in order to reflect an update to that. But this is roughly my attempt to answer this really complicated question. Does this make sense to you, Laurette? Do you want to comment more on it?
No, I think that makes sense. I think it's probably as much as one can hope for in a sense. You talked about functions being superpowers, and I was just wondering about, the misuse of that. It's something that, I'm sure you are very keenly aware of. So I look forward to see how this plays out. It's very exciting.
Me too. So to add one more thing to that, particularly about the notion of a superpower. So currently, for example, one thing that we really want to have is that people are telling their own histories, right? I would prefer if the people of the Congo would be telling and writing their own history or contributing to this history more than, for example, having this history being written by, I don't know, Belgian researchers, for example. And I'm pretty convinced that this may be true for the English and maybe the French Wikipedia, that they are actually people from the Congo contributing to those articles, having a voice in how they are themselves being represented. But then if you go to the Hungarian Wikipedia, to the Japanese Wikipedia, you will rarely have people from the Congo contributing to that. What you will have is people from Hungary or from Japan who will rely on sources which are often European, which are often colonial, to describe the Congo. So you won't have the same kind of representation in those languages. And I really think that wiki functions, that abstract Wikipedia, that this approach of generating text is a superpower, because we now allow everyone to contribute to those comments and to contribute also to languages they usually don't have access to. And that we're taking down the barrier of someone from the Congo actually being able to contribute to the Hungarian Wikipedia, which probably wasn't really realistic before. So I really hope that we can achieve more equity in this direction and have a world where more people feel empowered and are empowered to actually contribute their own voices to the knowledge commons.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, Michal Henry Warwick. Go ahead, Michal.
Right, yeah, so thanks. So my other question would be about, if I understood you correctly, you expect that people will contribute into abstract Wikipedia by actually writing those meaning-independent, language-independent representations. So in GF, we have some experience with maybe trying to give people different sort of syntax tree editors and conceptual authoring tools where people can click and point and it sort of composes the meaning representation sort of behind the scenes. And you can try many different things. You know, you can get people to actually edit the actual syntax trees, or you can build some sort of an interface on top of that. I mean, how far are you in sort of designing the user experience for the editors? I mean, are you sure that it's even going to be doable? I mean, you said at one point that you don't need parsing, right? You only need generation, which means that you assume that all the meaning representations will be hand coded or whatever. But have you made allowances for maybe, let's say you discover later that this is actually such a big obstacle for people that you're not getting so many contributors because it's just so difficult for people to author content in this way. So maybe you will need parsing after all. What are your thoughts about this?
Yes, you're absolutely right. So I'm actually really looking hard into what a grammatical framework did with the form-based editors, with the click and point editors, and so on. And our current thoughts is that we can hopefully replicate something like this and make it usable, so that we have kind of form-based editing of abstract syntax trees. So I think you can see this screen.
Yeah.
Okay, so this would be basically the middle thing, that we have this kind of, and hopefully this is then something that users can edit. The idea would be they would always see the preview of what they're editing right now in the languages that they speak, so they can see, oh yeah, this looks right, and go ahead and change it directly and have some manipulation through, so directly in the sense of changing this form, just like in the just like grammatical framework did in several things. So we really want to learn from those experiences and hopefully get a sec. But you're completely right. Maybe this is not something that people will be able to actually edit. So one alternative approach that we have then, for example, is then to use actually natural language entry. So where people can then type text, just type text as they're used to, and then we try to interpret this either with a parser. In that case, I would track back what I said earlier, but we don't need a parser, or by actually having a machine-learned parser that then takes this text and creates several interpretations, and you can check out the different interpretations and turn it then into this kind of form-based editing where you can then further refine what you are working with, see how this represents, how this previews in the different languages, and then basically you jump back from here to there, and this is what will be stored in the end. You see what it will be generated to, and you can here try to get it into the right information. The hope is that, once we have this kind of text entry, people are pretty good at picking up cues of what does the machine understand, what does the machine not understand, and then they start to restrict their own language in a way that actually is more comfortable for the machine in order to get the interpretations that the user wants to. So those are some ideas that we are working on. But we are very much aware that the UX will be particularly challenging for an author. In the end, you are completely right. If we manage to get the system and no one can edit it, we actually completely failed in our goal, right? Our goal must be that more people can actually edit this in their languages, and not that this becomes an obstacle towards editing and contributing to Wikipedia. So on a good side, editing Wikipedia today is actually not as easy as it sounds in the first place. But I don't like to I don't like to build on this. So I'd rather have some kind of user interface, and here we are totally open towards ideas and how to make this more accessible to more people. And this is our current thinking, is maybe we can start with this and hope, and maybe we can add this later if it's necessary. But you're right, this is a very much open question. So this is something that the UX team is right now ramping up for Wiki functions. It will be focused in the next year very much on how to make this accessible as possible. And we also hope that this is something where we actually cannot, and this is something that Wikimedia is actually traditionally, in Wikidata we had a similar dynamics, where external researchers will hopefully be able to actually plug in their systems and help us with figuring out alternative UXs, alternative UIs, and make this more accessible. So we don't think that we necessarily need to figure out all the answers here. We have an open system and people can build on top of that. And we are happy then to see if something of those things works. Let's just integrate it. Let's take it back. We did this with Wikidata again and again. The whole Sparkle endpoint only exists because external researchers have actually started building it. We wouldn't have done it ourselves, for example. And also a lot of the consistency checks that Wikidata have been developed in such a way. We expect with abstract Wikipedia to have a similar dynamics, that external teams will actually help us figuring out some of those problematic parts and work on it. So our current thought is we'll start with this kind of user interface, as you have described it, and as Grammatic Framework already does it. And we'll see how far it takes us and what we need to in order to get this better. But you're completely right, the UX is one of those painful open question marks.
Yeah, good luck. It's a little researched area. It's not really a mainstream topic. There was some interest in the 1990s in sort of conceptual editing and this kind of what you see is what you meant kind of editing. But that's a very, very small minority interest. Yeah, well, good luck. Thanks for, well, I'm glad to hear that you're taking these questions seriously, basically. That's what I wanted to hear.
And as said, we're very happy about people actually working on these areas. As said, we don't have to have all the answers. I do hope and expect that the world outside will actually help us with many of those, because the benefit would be so great if we get this right. So, yay, let's try it.
Okay, and next we had a question from Henry on the chat, and then we have Warwick, Kat, and Arne. Do you want to read the question, Henry, or just?
Actually, I'm optimistic about this idea, and I think it's doable. So I even have a more ambitious goal, and so my question is to estimate the workload or how long it can be done. And my question is how many senses or per my interpretation, it's about an abstract concept to describe everything in this universe, and I think that could be somehow a metric for the whole efforts we need to spend on this project, or some even grander project.
Yes, you are absolutely right. And this is a question I get asked a lot, and I ask myself, and we don't really have the answer. If we can get away, with a few hundreds of thousands of those, of constructors, senses, how to describe them, that would be great, because this means we can actually translate to many languages. If we have tens of thousands of those, we might be in trouble. If we have hundreds of thousands of those, we definitely will fail, right? So, so I don't know. What we did is we took things like FrameNet and checked on a few Wikipedia articles how good is actually the coverage of those frames. So we know that FrameNet has a few dozen, low hundreds of frames. How good is the coverage that FrameNet does on random Wikipedia articles and so on? and you get, the usual 2080 thing. It looks like a lot of the text is covered by the frames, and then there are a few which are not. And then you can ask a question like, how complete is the Wikipedia article without those frames? But I also think about it, yeah, but if I knew that I have those frames available, would I have phrased my Wikipedia article differently in order to carry the same language and so on? So in short, I have no idea. I'm convinced that because of the low baseline that we have, we will get some benefit, even with a very small number of frames. Things like locations and so on, repetitive information that can be created for a large number of articles, just to provide some baseline information and stuff like this. Species, places, people. There's a lot of formulaic expression which can create it with a certain sense, of course. But then, if you push, to the actually interesting parts of a biography, of the interesting parts of a physical theory and so on, you will probably easily get into things where we won't have something to represent it. Can I now capture it? Is there a different way I can say it, or something? And so I think, in short, the good news is we don't have to capture everything because at once, right? Because we can start iteratively in building it out. And we will learn on the way, like how far we get with the different things. And I wish I knew the answer to this question, because as you said, it would be so incredibly useful to make an estimate of those, but I don't. And I guess this is something that we will learn on the way, like to get a better estimate on this answer. Sorry for not having a better answer than that, but basically we did a few experiments, and it looks like you can get quite good coverage with a few dozen frames, but we really don't know how far it can really take us if we make it constructive instead of descriptive of existing sources.
Thanks for the answer. We have Work, Kat, and Arne. So Work, you can ask a question now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, well, so this is kind of going back to the earlier question, and I forget whose name it was. She sounded like she had like a South African accent or something. But
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, your response kind of made me think of, yeah, the references aspect of it, because it's like, even if we were to have like a way of translating articles, it's like a big part of, I mean, I guess the idea of Wikipedia is that it's like verified up to the quality of the references. And if you have like mostly English language references, then that's kind of going to dominate every other language. And even if people can't understand, or even if they can read the article, they can't verify the references because all of those are in English. And so you have this kind of combinatorial explosion if you think about how do you like really democratize it in some sense, because it seems like the English language would be like the hegemon of all languages in so many ways, not just the actual content being generated, but yeah, the references and other things. And then, yeah, I mean, I guess another question that's maybe not relevant so much to the GF part, but it's like, why? I mean, yeah, I guess maybe it would be hard if there was like a bunch of forks of Wikipedia, but like on a given article, why can't there just be like 2 forks where if you have 2 countries or 2 ethnicities and engaged in a civil war and they want to present different evidence for their sides of a conflict, like obviously that's going to be a very difficult domain, because it's like, how do you choose which language or which sources dictate the content of the article? And so, yeah, I'm just wondering, why can't there be a fork? And then the reader can look at both options and decide, you know, where the truth lies in between or whatever.
Right. So please remind me to answer both questions. I'll start with the first one. In Wikidata already we have some experience with collecting references from different language backgrounds. And we see often that we simply have different, we have several references for the same fact, and they often can be from different languages. So we would have, for example, the birth date of Marie Curie, to give a simple example, and we would have references in Polish, in French, in English, and so on. And then when generating the text for the natural language for the Wikipedias, the system could actually choose like which reference to use, given that we know that the reader is going to be reading it in Polish or whatever. We obviously don't expect to have a reference for every fact in every language, because also in many languages there's simply not enough content out there on the web. So we will often have the case that a statement will be referred to a source in a different language, and this is already the case. Not all references in English Wikipedia are necessary to English sources. They are preferably to English sources, but if there are no English sources, they will take also sources in other languages, like whatever, French or Chinese or whatever. It makes the reference obviously harder to check if it's in a natural language that that a lot of the readers don't understand. And here again, we rely on the many eyes principle. Hopefully someone who speaks the language has checked whether the reference is actually is actually supporting the statement that it's purported to support. So there is nothing in the system of abstract Wikipedia that is inherently in the system that makes English a hegemon. There is the fact that most of the web is in English, and since Wikipedia is a web-based system, most people will probably search the web for references and therefore mostly find English sources. But I hope that over time we will have more references in more languages, and that we will basically lead to more equity and diversity on the web with regards to that. But this is not a problem that we as Wikipedia can solve. We are just reflecting the knowledge of the world and the references on the world. And one thing we are thinking about is, for many languages and so on, like, could we extend the idea of what a good reference is to, for example, to have oral sources in specific cases, to have oral histories and so on. But this is something that really the community has to figure out and decide and how to expand that. And the Wikipedia community has started from a very constrained view of what is acceptable for an encyclopedia, but over the years, I sense that more and more conversations between Wikipedians are about how to extend it in order to allow for a higher diversity in knowledge without sacrificing the quality of the encyclopedia. So this is a very difficult problem. But it's not a problem that is particular to the abstract Wikipedia project, but it's just a problem of Wikipedia in general. And having more languages come together, I think is actually beneficial towards having a higher diversity in sources and being able to collect more references for specific data in different languages. So yeah. I hope we're not contributing to the hegemony of English, but rather we are reflecting it as far as needed, but hopefully also starting to deconstruct it as well as possible. So that would be my my essay of an answer for the first question. Would you like to answer to that one in particular, or shall I move on to the second question?
You can go on. I mean, I don't need, if someone else wants to take the next question too, you can answer that after the Q.
Yeah, and I'll go to the second question. Why can't we have a fork of Wikipedia? This has been tried. For example, there are several. There's often the claim that Wikipedia is leaning left, for example, and there have been several more conservative approaches towards Wikipedia, more right-wing Wikipedias, and they basically are a fork of Wikipedia, and it's totally okay to fork Wikipedia. The license allows it, and you can go ahead and set up your own. The software is all available. We make it as easy as possible to actually fork Wikipedia, and you can do so. So that's okay, and I would rather though that, instead of having a fork of an article, if both sides get together and describe both sides in a single article. It's similar to what I was describing earlier with my experience with the Croatian and Serbian Wikipedia and the English Wikipedia. The English Wikipedia I regard as much more neutral and less biased than either the Serbian or Croatian Wikipedia in many of those topics. And because they often have contributors from both sides trying to find a common ground instead of just representing one page, I basically have the situation of a fork. I can read the Serbian Wikipedia, I can read the Croatian Wikipedia and see how they are different there. But a lot of people won't take the time of checking the different Wikipedia forks and so on. Never mind if they even have the language skills to do so. Croatian and Serbian is particularly easy because they are sufficiently intelligible. But for example, an interesting example are the Arab and Hebrew Wikipedia on topics of the Middle East. And I'm pretty sure that they don't always agree on everything, like on the history of Jerusalem and so on. And I would find it more interesting actually to see a common view instead of just reading the Hebrew or the Arab side on those topics. Yeah, but again, no one. We are totally for forks. You can create your own forks and your own representation. And again, abstract Wikipedia won't override the local content. So the Arab Wikipedia will still continue to have its article on Jerusalem. The Hebrew Wikipedia will still have continue to have its article on Jerusalem. We are merely there for those places where there are gaps in the current Wikipedias. And we're not planning to, remove local articles at all. So in that sense, we do still continue to have forks in different languages, and hopefully make it easier to compare actually those languages, because we now have a common view as well, which can be available in a specific language. So, yeah. Happy to hear an answer, or either to give to the next question.
I'll just pass it along.
Next question is Kat, and then we have Arne and Marco.
Hi, Denny. Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering if you think that there's, especially in terms of the need to restrict, or the potential that we may need to restrict the number of constructors, is there any risk that some of what people will be contributing to wiki functions is already represented in some way in Wikidata? Or is that just an advantage that as more people start making contributions to wiki functions, if there's something similar in Wikidata, then they'll just be able to reuse that and quickly convert it to the appropriate Wiki functions markup?
Yes, both will be possible. So we will make Wikidata accessible from Wiki functions so that you can actually query Wiki function and just take the results from there and display it. So to give an example, the population number is something that would make a lot of sense to keep it in Wiki functions because it might be easier editable there than as an abstract content in, the population number makes sense to have it in Wikidata, and because it's easier to edit there, easier to compare to external sources and so on, and then have a query in Wiki functions that asks for this data and then generates the text out of it. Or it can do it similar to how Arthur was suggesting it. We can have the information explicit in Wiki functions and then compare against what is in Wikidata in order to flag, for example, inconsistencies between those. And it's completely up to the community whether they want to use a query-based approach for specific data, whether they want to use a consistency checking approach for data. And they can even change it, from article to article, from topic to topic, and so on. So having it both in Wikidata Wikidata will always remain more machine readable and simpler structured than whatever we will have in Wiki functions. Wiki functions might get rid of the complexities and accidents of natural language, but it will still be a pretty complex way to represent the content. So it will be easier to access data from Wikidata. It will always remain easier to do so. And therefore, those two projects will have a slightly different weight and goal in the whole thing. Thanks for the question, Kat, and great to see you again. Do you have a follow-up on this, or shall we move to the next question?
We can move on. Thank you.
Arne is next.
Yeah, so I think my question overlaps with Marcos. It's a very general question to both to Denny and to the community. So to Denny, the question is, what would you most like the GF community to do next, and what then? And then to the community, to the audience, I would like to have some kind of an round robin or whatever on what if you would like to contribute and in what way. So who is willing to do this and has time for it? For my own part, I can just say that I will give some thoughts about it next week when there is this NLG tutorial, which is very much geared towards this problem, and it will be a kind of a bottom-up approach where we start with simple facts and then go to more complex things. But okay, but maybe then you have already said what you want from the GF community, or what would you said, for instance, that the Wiktionary or the lexical information that is now in Wiktionary in a kind of unorganized form, so should be revised in some way. And then there are also some other things that you might.
Yes. So first, I'm really super thankful for the work the Grammatical Framework has done. Without Grammatical Framework, I don't think abstract Wikipedia as an idea would exist, because Grammatical Framework really shows that this is possible, what we're trying to do here. And having an existence proof is kind of awesome for the work that abstract Wikipedia is aiming to do. And so what I hope I really hope that the two communities will work together, will be together, will learn from each other. One of the things, for example, that were mentioned earlier, that Grammatical Framework already has experience with this kind of form-based editing with abstract syntax edits. We really want to learn from the experiences. Tell us, we tried this already and we had we learned the following lessons. We we don't want to repeat every mistake. We don't want to discover all these things freshly. We'd really like to work from your experiences, to figure out what has worked before, what didn't work before, why didn't it work before, what can we try differently. We want to make new mistakes. We don't want to repeat the mistakes that have already been done before in order to get faster to the goal of say, Wikipedia. Grammatical Framework has more than 2 decades of experience, has tons of code, has all these great resource libraries and all these things that that would be a shame not to build on top of that and not to reuse that. And the way we can most effectively work on this is basically if we have community members coming from one community to the other, sharing their knowledge, sharing their experiences. And we also will try to figure out, can we actually share code? Can we work together on displays? Can we share data? Can we share lexicographical data, for example, between the projects? Can we share the grammars? Can we, and all this? This is things that we have to figure out. But I think most important really is to see what has already worked, to build on top of the experience, and to learn from the good things that you have done, and learn also from the things that didn't work out, and see that. So this is my hope from what I would like from the 2 communities, to really work together and to figure out how to make this happen.
Yeah, so this is very much I mean, the hugeness of this task requires a much wider community than we have in GF, just to scale up from 40 to 300 languages. And if someone had said that we want to build an encyclopedia with 20 million articles in 300 languages 20 years ago, I don't think many people would have believed that. But now it is there because there is such a community in Wikipedia. So, and it will never be complete. That's also something that we have to but so the other question was to the community, actually. So if we could, is there some kind of a vote, or if we could ask anyone if you would like to somehow be involved in this project? Or, I mean, I'm not expecting everyone to have time and focus for just this thing, but then we could, is there some kind of a sign that one can show, like a thumb or inter?
Yeah, you can go to reactions on the.
We can do this later, of course. But sorry, I'm harassing you now. Good. Well, yes.
Hello.
I
really like this harassment of Arne, and thank you, Denny, very much for your talk. I have a lot of ideas, but I have a lot of kids around me, and I'm not in the situation of being able to talk and ask questions, but I will for sure reach out a bit later.
Thanks.
Thank you a lot.
Yeah. Was that, yeah, so we can move on to Marco's question. So you can repeat it, or we can read it out loud, whichever.
Sure, thanks. Hi, Denny. Just wanted to say that, yeah, I really love the start simple then scale up approach in general. That's how, I mean, I really believe that's how we build things that work. Then I just want to wear my Wikidata hat, and I would like to hear more about the milestones, the 3 milestones that you mentioned. Because it looks like they will all target Wikidata on the first step, right? So I just wanted to hear a little bit about the details on how the workflow would be, especially for the descriptions and glosses milestones. Just maybe, I don't know if you can sketch the steps that are needed to do that? I would love to hear that. Thanks.
So I have the first design document that I'm right now discussing with Wikimedia Deutschland. And we want to publish it pretty soon to the communities. So this is something that obviously needs to be done together with the Wikidata communities. It has to be done together with the Wikidata developers, and where we need to get agreement on. I can roughly tell you what my current thinking is, but obviously this is not what's going to happen in the end, but rather this is like the first straw man that we're going to discuss, and then it's up to the communities and the development teams to actually decide on what exactly will happen. But the rough idea, for example, for abstract descriptions would be that we add a new language code for abstract content and store that inside of Wikidata. And then we generate the natural language text for the missing descriptions. Now the question is, do we generate them on the fly, or do we generate them do we materialize them and store them in the system? And both of those have like technical and advantages and disadvantages, which all amount to like, how is caching working? How do we propagate changes to functions, to the lexicographical data, and so on? And those are getting into rather technical questions on how exactly those steps happen and so on. Like, do we just like materialize everything, and then when something gets updated, do we check if something has changed and then materialize it again, or do we create them on the fly when it's needed? How does on the fly creation work with search? Not very well usually. And all these kind of questions. But in the end, those are the questions that we will need to figure out. But roughly, we would introduce a new language in Wikidata, which actually is then abstract content, and then we have a function to run on this, which generates a natural language text, and this is then being used in the place of an explicitly written one. This is the rough idea, but again, the details have to be figured out, and this is something that that's a conversation that we want to start actually pretty soon, probably within the next few weeks, and see what the communities think like, what the different development teams think like, and where we can get them in the next year. So we have about a year when this should be happening and become reality.
Okay, thanks a lot, Danny.
Next question, Harry.
So I am kind of wondering about the wiki functions. Basically, since I heard about it, I was wondering how you would handle all the various paradigms of programming, because I'm pretty sure that if you hand it out to the community, there will be plenty of people implementing the same function, one recursive, one iterative, maybe actually 5 recursive, because you don't realize that it already exists. And how do you plan on handling that there might be too many versions of solving the same problem?
Yes, thanks for the question, Herbert. Also, great background you have. I really love it. The idea is that we can have indeed a large number of implementations for each functions, and that is okay. So the implementations have to return the same results. That's basically the condition. If they don't return the same results, we're in trouble, and then we basically kick out the ones that are not behaving well, that don't follow the tests and so on. But basically, all the implementations should always have the same results. And in that case, the system decides which implementations is what to run, because the results should always be the same. We can then decide on the metadata, like what are actually the runtime behavior of those different functions. Like, do they need a lot of RAM? Do they need a lot of CPU or whatever? And the system can then decide which implementation is exactly to run. It's not up to the user to say, they say, I want to run this function, but they do not decide on the exact implementation to run. This is something that the system does based on previous behavior. And we can then compare the different implementations and see what behavior they have, and then choose the ones that we actually want to have run. All assuming that they are indeed giving the same results, which is hopefully we will have tests inside of Wiki functions to make those things sure. We will run them against each other and propagate those when they don't fulfill the conditions. But this is one of the things that we indeed want to figure out. We do want to allow the users to write different implementations for the same functions, to have, you know, a shootout between the iterative and the recursive function and so on, and to actually store all this metadata, make it accessible both to the system itself in order to figure out which implementations actually to use, but also to the outside world, because this might be interesting to see for them to run. And we plan to have implementations in different programming languages, and we definitely expect also the community to use different paradigms for implementing those. So yeah, we are aware that those differences will probably exist within the system, and we want to leverage them as an advantage, actually, in the hope that over time we will find the most efficient ways to actually calculate those functions and to return them.
Thanks.
Does this make sense?
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Any more questions, anyone? There is no one in the queue right now, so just speak up.
So we got one request for what are your dreams about grammatical framework. Unfortunately, I won't be able to attend that session next week, but I guess that my whole talk was basically presenting my dream about how grammatical framework could look like. And it was pointed out by a few of you that it is already ambitious enough. So I guess this is my entry for that session about the dreams of natural language generations that I have.
Yeah, that's a good conclusion. This is definitely a lot of work to do and ambitions. Shall we wrap this up? Anyone want to say something? We can continue the discussion on Discord. I made the poll on the Discord. I pinned a question on the general channel. So if you want to indicate your interest, you can find that message and click the thumbs up button. So that's a very unofficial poll.
So thanks everyone for being here. And really, this is also an invitation. I'm super happy to see that there are Wikimedians here that have followed up on the invitation from the grammatical framework community to join the summer school. I hope you will learn and bring a lot of your knowledge back to the communities. And I hope that the two communities will work together continue to work together in the future. And this is an invitation. This is an open project. We are happy with people joining. We are very interested in having your skills be represented, in having your backgrounds be represented on the projects. And we would be very happy with growing together and working together towards our goal.
Thank you for the invitation. I think this is very hard to resist. And yeah, I would like to see this as a kind of a man on the moon project, in the sense that it's very ambitious. It's very, as you said, what was this? It's very attractive. And in some sense, we know that it's possible. So if we just put enough resources and work on it, I mean, it's possible to do something really much more than what we have now. But we have to be patient also and do it in a good order. And give it 10 years, and if we can organize the work well and then do it well, so then we are close to your dream, I think. That's
yeah. So we can let's end the live stream for today, and so tomorrow the same time slot, 8 p.m. Singapore time, come to Zoom for random chit chat, questions, answers, improvised talks. See you there. And
Thanks.
good night, good morning, whatever.